Honourable Member for Christchurch South and Leader of the Opposition, please.
I'm obliged to you, Your Honour. Madam Deputy Speaker. When the House met this morning, I was expecting a debate on a resolution dealing with the report of the Parliamentary Reform Commission. During the course of that debate, the House must have paused to listen to matters pertaining to, and I quote, deep divisive behavior within the opposition Democratic Labour Party that needs to be put behind them. Now, I was somewhat unsure as to what that opinion had to do with the debate. And I did say to you, Your Honour, I expected the debate purely on the resolution. But if that quality of presentation is allowed, Your Honour will not prevent me from responding accordingly. But do permit me, Your Honour, to pause courteously and to, as I always do, welcome the Honourable Prime Minister on one of her many visits to Barbados. Let me welcome her, and of course to the House. I will come to the terms of reference of the Parliamentary Reform Commission report, but of course the House heard as well, without interruption, matters as to crossing the floor and recrossing the floor. That continues to be a public obsession of the Honourable Member who preceded me immediately. And the House will permit me to share with this House and with this country the litany of war, cleavage, and dysfunction that has visited the other side over the past few years. As I said, Your Honour, if that quality of debate is allowed, surely I will be allowed to respond accordingly. And to remind the Speaker who immediately preceded me, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honourable Prime Minister of this country, who does not speak with impunity on matters of party cleavage and dysfunction and division. Surely there is no impunity on those matters. And to remind that a gentleman who led this country for 14 years, in the person of the Honourable, the Right Honourable Owen Arthur, left his party that he led with public statement and indeed with greater public statement at the bottom of the steps of this chamber where we stand today, prophesying despotism that would visit government in this country. There are many voices in this country who will say that his prophecy has come to pass. So when these statements are made to the applause of colleagues on the government side, let all persons concerned, remember that when you live in a glass house, large stones should never be in the palm of your hand. It is an unprecedented course of events that a prime minister left a party that he led prime ministerially for 14 years in bitterness, with a letter of resignation and a subsequent speech disavowing she who was to become the leader of that party. And I repeat, prophesying despotism that would visit government in this country, and indeed despotism that would visit this country. I came to discuss the Parliamentary Reform Commission report. But if I'm to hear that quality of debate, I say with the poet, no, I will not still my voice. I will respond to it accordingly. We heard it for 2.5 hours. I don't propose to speak for 2.5 hours. But some things need to be defended against, and some things need to be answered. And it needs to be said, I repeat, that those statements will never be made with impunity. Matters before the High Court of this country, the Civil High Court, are matters of public record. There's a case before the High Court, claim number 0642 of 2013. It was filed by a former member of this Parliament. It was filed by a former member of cabinet of this government against a colleague member of cabinet of this government. And while that case was filed and was pending, both the Honourable Member for St. Andrew at the time and the Honourable Member for St. James North at the time sat in the cabinet together. And there's an Honourable Member sitting in this chamber, I won't identify him, who on the 8th of August 2014 sent a witness statement to that matter. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to read it. But to make it plain language for the public, one cabinet member sued another cabinet member for defamation, and the claimant, he who sued, was supported by a member of this present Parliament. He was sued, a cabinet member sued another cabinet member, and contributing a witness statement to that event was a person who sits presently in this Parliament, and I'm not going to give the details of what that honourable member who sits in here today said in relation to that matter of defamation of character. Claim number 0642 of 2013. And we visit a Parliament today to talk about divisions in a party. The honourable member for St. Michael East fired from his cabinet office. That is not by itself evidence of any division. But on the day that this Parliament eulogized the former Prime Minister Owen Arthur, the former representative for St. Peter, the honourable member for St. Michael East stood in the Parliament and spoke with criticism against the Prime Minister of this country. On the same day, in eulogizing the deceased former Prime Minister Owen Arthur, the then Honourable Member for St. Andrew joined the member for St. Michael East in public criticism of she who now sits and runs this country as Prime Minister. So I say that these statements of party division must not and cannot be uttered here or anywhere with impunity. Former member for Christchurch West. Former member for Christchurch West in public litigation was hustled out of the Barbados Labour Party and has made no public political contribution since then. It was a nasty and public affair. Dr. Crystal Haynes, former senator, removed from the Senate without any public explanation in the aftermath. In the aftermath of having uttered statements opposing the government's transaction of public properties at Whole Town. The honourable member for St. Michael South Central, I'm sorry, I apologize to the public for this statement of affairs within the government, but it has to be done. Fired twice. The honourable member for St. Michael South Central. You don't come here and see a more unhappy individual. The honourable member for St. Lucie. I'm not going to refer to conversations that he and I had in the aftermath of his dismissal from the cabinet. I'm not going to do that to him. I sat at the estimates this year, and the honourable member for St. Christchurch East Central was very animated this morning on the issue of party membership and crossing the floor. He, that honourable member, uttered the now famous words in this chamber: how many more must die in relation to neglect, ministerial neglect of road repairs in his constituency, which the honourable member said had caused the death of a man along Lodge Road, to be particular. I cannot be challenged on this. I sat here and I heard it at the estimates this year. And the honourable member for Christchurch East Central complained that he had sent money to the Ministry of Transport and Works, and that money had never been expended as he had intended it so to have been expended. And he uttered the words, how many more must die, Your Honour? Within a week, another man died on the same Lodge Road on a motorcycle. He was joined by another honourable member who was equally animated today on the issue of division. The honourable member for St. Peter joined the honourable member for Christchurch East Central and complained about the lack of infrastructural works in his constituency, St. Peter. And they talk of dysfunction in a party. This country is visited with dysfunction in government. And I will come to particulars of this Parliamentary Reform Commission report. But not before I speak of the honourable member for St. Michael Northwest. And this must never be allowed to disappear from public debate or public discourse in this country. When he left the courtroom and on the steps of the court, he uttered statements which go to the very heart of public trust. I'm not going to repeat the statements. The public knows. The public knows. He comes to this Parliament, as I saw him here this morning. As indeed did I see the honourable member for Christchurch East here this morning as well. And as far as I'm aware, both of them still sit in the parliamentary government. Don't distress, Your Honour. Do not distress. Let not your heart be troubled. As the old people say, and I don't know how Hansard is going to reflect this, we were going along very good this morning. We were going along very well this morning. Until I heard these utterances of division and dysfunction and cleavage. And I'm going to look at the honourable member for St. Michael East. I'm going to look at him and say this: that while he sits as the honourable member for St. Michael East, at least 2 pretenders are crawling across his constituency, distributing hampers behind his back. And they tell me about party dysfunction and cleavage and division. Put down the big rocks. If you want to be comfortable in your glass house, put down the big rocks. I am so eager to come to the essence of this debate, but I thought, Your Honor, that I heard statements from there this morning. Look, if anybody in this country, and certainly in this house, is afraid of the Honourable Prime Minister, I am not. And I will meet fire with fire. And nobody speaks with impunity on these matters. This government has been a litany of internal division, dysfunction, and cleavage. A litany. And for the public's benefit, I say again, civil claim number 0642 of 2013. Go to the witness statement that was submitted on the 8th of August 2014. I'm not going to become so angry that I'm going to read it. But when the public reads it, when the public reads that witness statement of a member who sits in here right now, the public will be alarmed, and the public will begin to wonder, well, how could they cast stones? Really? How could they? How could they? And how could the honourable member for St. Michael Northwest sit comfortably after he said what he said? That he is of the view now that it is not only the rain in Barbados that sets up. That is his view. Let me press on, Your Honour. Let me press on. I was very pleased to see the students of the 2 public schools here this morning, the George Lamin Primary School and the Ellerslie Secondary School. And the Honourable Prime Minister chose this occasion of their presence to engage a debate which I describe as a hierarchy of heroism. The Honourable Prime Minister made some comparison between the heroic efforts of Right Excellent Grantley Adams and Right Excellent Errol Barrow. And of course, Right Excellent Grantley Adams is credited with being the father of the movement for universal adult suffrage, and Right Excellent Errol Barrow is credited for being the father of that universal right to education. And it was at that point that the debate became academically and politically more worthy of engagement. But as I say, it is an attempt to establish a hierarchy of heroism. In other words, which of these 2 events has been more pivotal to Barbados' development? The right to vote or the right to an education? And the presence of those children here this morning was symbolic. It is a pity that they did not hear that the right that they enjoy to an education may be of greater significance than the right which was given in, I think, June 1950. I want to say, in answer to the question raised by the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, that the overwhelming majority of the people in this Parliament are here because of this revolution of 1961. The right, not the privilege, the right to a free education. 1950 sent the poor to the polls. 1961 sent the poor people's children to freedom, justice, and democracy. I repeat, 1950 sent the poor people to the polls. 1961 sent the children of the poor to school, and therefore to freedom, justice, and democracy. I will not wrestle with anyone as to the relative importance of those two events. They were very important. But I do not and will never deny the ultimate importance and the ultimate significance of that 1961 revolution, when a government determined that every child in this country had a right to a free secondary education, a right. And while 1950 gave the poor the right to choose parliamentarians, 1961 gave the right to children to emancipate their lives from the fields of labor. It used to be as bad as that, Your Honor. It used to be as bad as that, the condemnation to child labor. When people were leaving school at 12 and 13 and 14 and going into the fields of agriculture and working. And I'm not here to deny the importance of 1950, but I will engage in no wrestling match in which you seek to make comparisons between universal adult suffrage and universal child education. And therefore it becomes my position in any event that there has been no revolution visited on this country which has exceeded the importance of 1961. And I wish I could have said that this morning in the presence of the immediate beneficiaries, the little children of George Lamming Primary School and the teenagers of Ellerslie Secondary School. Let that wrestling match end. Let it end. And let us end a debate that seeks to elevate the contribution of one man above another. And if the march towards democracy is a continuous march, if it is a continuous march, there must never be any attempt to diminish 1961 or to have the significance of 1961 disappear from the annals of our history, because I did listen very carefully to the Honourable Prime Minister, and I did hear the Honourable Prime Minister credit Right Excellent Arrow with independence. But before independence, there was the revolution of 1961, and cleverly, a government that intends, and I will speak of this at greater length on a future occasion, but a government that intends not to reform education, but to dismantle the education that emancipated the poor children of this country, a government that intends to do that, I am not surprised that the government would seek to obscure the revolution of 1961 by making reference to 1966, which is also important. But in amplifying 1966 independence, I defy this government in any debate as to the modern history of Barbados to obscure the 1961 revolution. But then this is a government that has sought to change even the name of Independence Day to something called Barbados National Day. This government has been in the business of dismantling the symbols of freedom, justice, and democracy in this country. And the people must know this. The people must make themselves aware as to the business of this government, that this government's prime business is the dismantling of the institutions of freedom that saved the lives of the poor in this country. And it must now trouble this government that the people of Barbados are becoming aware of these events. It is not only a government that is dismantling the voices of freedom that may well exist within its government, as was the voice of Senator Dr. Crystal Haynes, who has disappeared from public life. Not only is this government concerned about dismantling the institutions of freedom, this government has been dismantling the voices of freedom in its own party. And when I say that, I turned and looked at the Honourable Member for St. Michael East. I'm not attempting to curry his favor. I speak honestly. I speak honestly, and there are other voices of discontent within this government even while I speak. Even while I speak. And so the ritual, the weekly ritual of personal attack and personal invective, simply because I come in here and exercise my right to oppose this government. Let it continue. Let it continue. If people want brownie points, if the members of this government believe that the way to impress the Prime Minister for the sake of their own elevation is to engage in personal abuse of me every week, so be it. So be it. If that is the quality of debate that this government and its members is being taught, so be it. But the people of this country, their ears are open and their eyes are also wide open, and they can see what is happening in this country. They can see this Parliamentary Reform Commission report will come to discuss in its content fixed term limits for a government. We now live in a country in which an election date becomes a matter of ambush, not only of a political party, but of the people of Barbados. Why is this government so lacking in political stamina that it cannot allow itself to be given 5 years, and at the end of 3 years, the people in Barbados begin to guess as to whether we're going to have an election? That is an illegitimate government without stamina. A government which cannot start a program and complete it. A tired government. Who, rather than make contact with substance, preoccupies itself with form, and form expresses itself in cliches. Everything is a cliche. These sexy words used to define a government's program. But, Your Honor, please permit me to come to the Parliamentary Reform Commission report and to share a few observations, as is my right, with the public of Barbados. I will first read the terms of reference within that Parliamentary Reform Commission report. Permit me, Your Honor. Page 9 of the report, terms of reference. The Commission's terms of reference required it to seriously deliberate on a number of matters touching and concerning the Parliament and the Executive, some of which are constitutional in nature. The Commission was empowered to examine, consider, and inquire into Barbados's parliamentary system, process, and procedures. It was charged with making recommendations to strengthen Parliament and its functions. It was also required to make recommendations to enlarge and strengthen Barbados's democracy. Particular emphasis was to be given to making Parliament culturally relevant, inclusive, and modern. Finally, the Commission's reform proposals were to be of a nature that would meet Barbados's new circumstance as a parliamentary republic and promote the good governance of a nation. I read that to bring your Honour's attention to two phrases of some significance. At line 3, it says that these matters, some of which are constitutional in nature. I will focus on that presently. And after I focus on that, I will focus on the penultimate line, which describes Barbados as a parliamentary republic. Let the public be aware that it is this opposition's position that a debate on parliamentary reform is futile unless you have a larger debate on constitutional reform. And I'm going to say something to this Parliament that I say so often, but I'll say it nevertheless. A constitution is essentially a document which establishes the state. And in establishing the state, it establishes the institutions of state. And those three institutions, broadly and largely, are the Parliament, the Cabinet, and the judiciary. And not only does it establish the state and its institutions, it guarantees fundamental individual rights. And it goes beyond that. A constitution must, as an overarching legal document, it must embrace a political culture. It must embrace an ethos, a cultural ethos. And what do I mean by that? That it would embrace human values which sometimes derive from religious values. And that will be of some importance. And it is of some importance to this country. A country that a few years ago apprehended the fear that this government had intended to remove the question, the reference of God in its constitution. So that this is a country of many religious persons who live in fear that the government had intended to eliminate from its overarching legal document that governs all activity in this country. The people had feared that the reference to God would have disappeared. I come here to discourse constructively, not to engage in personal invective. Let us contend, let ideas contend. And so if the broad position must be that an important institution of state which the government says it is reforming, how can it reform that institution of state, the Parliament, unless it also brings a debate to this House for larger constitutional reform? It is futile. It does not make sense. It does not make sense. And that is not a personal attack on anybody. This is academic. This is intellectual. This is a legal discourse. And it is a legal discourse that is necessary. And it is a legal discourse that is of merit. And it becomes more meritorious When we consider that a few months ago, this country was told that a new Republican constitution is not a priority. So where are we? Where are we as a country today? It is not surprising that much of the Honourable Prime Minister's content this morning was about the DLP and her concern for the DLP and all kinds of things. Two big rocks. And the Honourable Prime Minister stands in a glass house attempting to throw them. And I have referred to all of those who suffer at the hands of despotism, nationally and within the party. And they suffer in silence because the only thing that heals the wounds of division within the Barbados Labour Party government is power. And when they did not have the power, they used internal party power to expel Miss Maria Agar, the former representative for Christchurch West.
Point of order, Mr. Madam Deputy Speaker. I only wish to remind the honourable member that the standing orders clearly provide that one is not able to call the name of any private citizen except he first gives notice to and obtains permission from the Speaker of the House. So he's now offending this rule on several occasions.
I'm obliged. The former member of Christchurch West was expelled from the Barbados Labour Party while it was in opposition. While it was in opposition, the former member for Christchurch West was expelled. Was this country told the reason for the expulsion? Was this country told the reason why the Honourable member for St. Michael East was removed from the cabinet? Was this country told the reason why the Honourable member for St. Lucie was removed from the cabinet? Was this country told why a certain senator was removed from the Senate within recent months after criticizing publicly on the floor of government? The government? We have a quorum. Don't run. Don't run. Keep the quorum intact. Keep the quorum intact. I have a witness statement lodged in the Supreme Court of this country. Lodged in the Supreme Court of this country. And they dare to come in here talking about division and dysfunction and cleavage, when the only thing that heals the wounds of cleavage within this government is the possession of power. That is the only thing that heals the wounds. So don't believe, Prime Minister of this country, that you have the right to speak of these matters with impunity. You don't. So rise on the points of order. I sat quietly and endured it all. And I am not afraid.
Honourable member.
And back to the Parliamentary Commission report, Your Honour.
Honourable member.
Yes, Your Honour.
From St. Joseph was correct.
Yes.
In the matter he drew to your attention.
Yes.
And for my knowledge, and I'm not so familiar, I am not aware that anybody who gets expelled or suspended or chooses to leave cabinet has anything to do with the management of the affairs. If there's a change in cabinet, there's a change in cabinet. But let us see if we can get back to the matter, order number 8, to do with the reform of the Parliamentary Commission, as is the topic that we are discussing today. I hate to interrupt you, but the way you were going down,
I appreciate the interruption.
For the public's attention as well, we want to be as correct as possible.
Yes, indeed.
So that members on the outside get to understand.
Yes.
And of course, if you're going to call names, as was indicated by the member for St. Joseph, the alert has to be given to the acting speaker, deputy speaker, in order for you to go through. The permission has to come.
I'm obliged to you, ma'am. Never let them come back in here with big rocks when they're in glass houses. Using power as the only balm against the abuse of that power, to disadvantage your members and consign and condemn them to the peripheries of the party and the government. Are they happy? Are they happy? I will let them answer the question. I have seen it close up, and I saw the witness statement. And I'm not going to embarrass anybody by reading the witness statement and its content. If the public saw it, if the public only saw it, and if the public only saw its content and digested its content, and look, any of them can come to me, because some of them don't know, you know, man. And I will hand it to them and disclose to them what is the anatomy of their government. I'm thinking that they can come in here and cast stones. Cast stones. And this sanctimonious concern for the other side, the other party, oh, it is falling into chaos. And chaos sits at the heart of this government. And as I have said, the only healing balm is the possession of power, which is used to disappoint and appoint and disappoint again. Didn't mean to do this. This was not intended to be the content of my speech, but this is how the learned Prime Minister, the Honourable Prime Minister, began this morning. And when you begin like this, you must stand and answer. And those whom you leave behind must answer as well. Let the public be aware. Let the public be aware, and let the baseless statements and accusations fall where they should fall. Let us come, Your Honor, to the terms of reference. As I said, let us come to the Parliamentary Reform Commission report. There's going to be a debate in here later today, and a lot will be said. But let us deal with this one now. I have taken a few of what I call the salient features of this Parliamentary Reform Commission report. I'm going to deal with them selectively. And this is intended not to be any attack on any member of that commission. This is the government's document. And you know, it is very interesting that at one point in listening to the Honourable Prime Minister, I said, well, this is the government's document brought here by resolution. And the Honourable Prime Minister takes the time to say that portions of it she does not agree with, but leads the resolution, quarreling with the government's document. You understand what is happening to government in this country, Your Honor? Do we understand what is happening to government in this country? That there's a resolution before this Parliament, which I will now read, led by the Honourable Prime Minister, whereas the Parliamentary Reform Commission was appointed on the 8th day of May 2023 to examine Barbados' parliamentary system and make recommendations for the strengthening of Parliament and the country's system of democracy, and whereas the Commission was empowered through its terms of reference to deliberate on matters touching and concerning the Parliament and the Executive by A, empowering, examining and inquiring into Barbados' parliamentary system, process and procedure, B, making recommendations to enlarge and strengthen Barbados' democracy, C, transforming Parliament into a culturally relevant, inclusive and modern institution, and that the recommended reform proposals would enhance good governance and create a parliamentary architecture befitting the new republic. And whereas, having consulted extensively with the Barbadian public here and abroad, the political parties and civil society presented its report to the President of Barbados on the 27th June 2024 with a wide range of recommendations consistent with its remit. Be it resolved that the Parliament of Barbados take note of the report of the Parliamentary Reform Commission 2024 and its recommendations, and this expresses that it is subject
point
to
of
the
order.
approval.
Madam Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Joseph.
The honourable member continues to plod through this chamber, speaking glibly on matters that he really ought to have a better grasp of. The report is not the government's document. A commission was established under law and sworn in by the President, given the commission by the President, and submitted its report to the President. The chamber is being asked by the Prime Minister through a resolution to take note of that report. It is not like if it was a white paper or a green paper which establishes or seeks to establish government's policy. A paper, a white paper or a green paper would be the government's document. But this is a report of a commission established independently under its own legislation. And it is therefore completely erroneous and a clear and distinct attempt to mislead the chamber and the public by saying that it is the government's document. It is not. It is a report of a commission established in law, and we are obligated to bring it to this chamber for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer.
I appreciate the intervention, and therefore I will continue to say that one drew from the Prime Minister's speech this morning that she is wrestling publicly with portions of the report. It was brought here, but it wasn't brought here by the Clerk of Parliament or the Marshals. It was brought here by the government. And I continue to say that the Prime Minister wrestled with portions of the report. That's the point I was making. Be it resolved that the Parliament of Barbados take note of the report and its recommendations. I say it is politically unseemly to accept a report sent to the President, sent to the Cabinet, brought to the House of Assembly by the government, and for the Honourable Prime Minister to wrestle with portions of the report publicly. That I use the phrase, politically unseemly. I did not use the word ingratitude. I did not. I did not accuse the Prime Minister, the Honourable Prime Minister, of ingratitude to those who sat and held several town hall meetings and produced a quality of report that to this day has not been similarly produced by a Constitutional Reform Commission. Where is their report? Because my original submission is that this report should be subsumed within a larger report of the Constitutional Reform Commission, but that report, in terms of its content, leaves much to be desired. But I defy the Honourable Prime Minister of this country to have a report brought to this House and to express these personal opinions here. You don't like the report or you like it. If you did not like it, maybe, just maybe, there was a time and a place to express that view. But it has been brought after much deliberation and hard work by a commission of adults, every one of them. And you seize the opportunity during the course of a debate in which you diverge into matters that are impertinent to the debate. and you disavow portions of it. That is not seemly. It really is not. And I suspect that not everyone would have done that. But this habit of making of yourself the sole and supreme voice of importance, that you elevate yourself above the content of a Parliamentary Reform Commission report and come here today and disavow portions of it. It is not the done thing. It is not the done thing. Let me, though, come to portions of that report which caught the eye. At page 11, Your Honor, paragraph 9, under the rubric, the electoral system, it says, national members of Parliament, nation MPs. Now, I am not going to burden you, Your Honor, by reading it, but basically what this portion of the report is saying is that there will be some MPs called national MPs, and I think the Honourable Prime Minister made reference to it this morning, and others who are called constituency representatives. This hierarchy. The Commission recommends that Barbados introduce a mixed system of representation, that is, one which includes constituency representatives as well as national members of Parliament. The Commission recommends that there should be 10 national members of Parliament. I can only come to the conclusion that a Parliament, by this proposal, and the Prime Minister did not reject it. The Prime Minister did not reject it. That this Parliament must now become divided between MPs who are called constituency MPs and some who are called national MPs. In Britain, you hear about the House of Commons, and never misunderstand language. The House of Commons and the House of Lords. That's why we probably still running about down here, claiming to be a republic, but with Westminster values. Because maybe, just maybe, in the minds of some, we are still in the land of the Lords. And the rest are commoners. Well, that is the language of ancient Britain, which survives in Britain today. Are we going forward as a republic, or are we reversing into the depths, the backward depths of Westminster? With a monarchy at its head, with an elitist proposal for parliamentary division, that some must come here to this chamber and be called constituency representatives. Or you going to deal with constituency matters, go and deal with street lights and road repairs and the bus service and the all kinds of services, and there'll be others who will be called elevated. Or we deal with the nation and a government that 4 years ago proposed republicanism, and I'm going to tell the people of this country shortly what is the essence of republicanism, so that they understand what this government is doing to government in this country. And we sit in 2025, and an Honourable Prime Minister accepts a proposal to divide a Parliament which claims to be a Republican Parliament into categories of membership, evoking memories, bad memories of parliamentary elitism, the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And we running around here in 2025 embracing these backward concepts. The essence of a Republican Parliament is a Parliament that is egalitarian. As among its members, like a cabinet that is egalitarian as among its members, except for primus inter pares, the chairman, the prime minister of that cabinet, is first, but the important word is powers equal. And in spite of that concept of egalitarianism in a cabinet, you come to a parliament, you come to a Republican so-called parliament, and you are dividing members into categories. And we are supposed to accept that. The Prime Minister has accepted it. The Honourable Prime Minister this morning did not reject it. In my view, and this will become subject to a party position, apparently the Prime Minister wants to run the DLP and all the other parties, perhaps some of which getting some financial support anyhow. The issue of subvention was mentioned. Look, Your Honor, please let me tell the people of Barbados what Westminster is about and what republicanism is about. Westminster is an outgrowth of a monarchical system of government in which the head of the state is a king or a queen, as the case may be. And power devolves from top to bottom. In a republican state, power devolves from the bottom up, and those who sit in parliament do so as authentic representatives of those at the bottom. Westminster is different. Westminster has been an outgrowth of the monarchy in which power devolves and derives from the top to the bottom. And going from the top to the bottom, at the top you have the House of Lords, sitting under the monarch. And then the House of Commons, commoners, from the Lords to the commoners. When you transfigure or transform yourself into a republican state, Parliament becomes representative not of a head of state, not of a monarch, but it becomes representative of the people. And let me demonstrate by practical example one of the fundamental differences between the monarchy and a republic. And let us contrast the United States against England. In England, when a man is charged before the court, his indictment reads, the Queen. Well, the Queen is dead. King Charles. An indictment before a court in England would read, the King against John Brown. John Brown is charged with a criminal offense. It says, the King against John Brown. Or the alternative language in the presence here now of a former prosecutor and a good one too. The clerk of this parliament used to be a prosecutor. Can I call his name? Can I say he used to be a good prosecutor? I do. I did a case against him already. Can't remember who won. And if he chooses not to remember, you would know why. But he was a good prosecutor. And when he brought that indictment, it read, and he would have said to the judge, the Crown or the Queen. The language was used interchangeably. And that is consistent with my view that the state and all persons who acted within that state were acting on behalf of the king, on behalf of the crown. In the United States, when a man is charged, when John Brown is charged, the indictment reads, the people. against John Brown. And that is a very live illustration of how the two states structure themselves. One a monarchy, one a republic. In the monarchy, all persons who act on behalf of the state act on behalf of the monarch, the king or queen, as the case may be. And therefore you have the queen or the king or the crown, they say interchangeably, versus John Brown. In the United States, it is the people versus John Brown. Sometimes we need to pause and understand language and what language means, and that language is related to consciousness. And that language, unless it has meaning, it stands for nothing. So that when the United States says the people against John Brown, they are speaking of the essence of republicanism. That power resides within the people, and that power devolves upwards to agents of the state. In the Westminster system, it is the other way around. Power derives at the top and devolves downwards. And all persons who act within that state act on behalf of the monarch. Some Barbadians now are pausing to ask whether we are a republic or whether we are Westminster. And the real answer to that is related to the active and real use of power in this country. And I repeat that it is untenable for this country to be plodding along without a Republican constitution while claiming to be a republic. Plodding along with a Republican constitution inhering with Westminster values. I say to the Honourable Attorney General, who's been very active after lunch, that a constitution is of highest priority. Now, it is urgent. It is more urgent than what this Parliament is doing today, because what this Parliament does today is an exercise in futility, except that it gives us a chance to examine the anatomy of this government and to find it wanting. Bring the Republican Constitution and bring it with urgency. Don't interrupt the business, the people's business. If you claim that you're a republic, do not interrupt the people's business with any election. And if you bring the election, well, I am not a prophet. I am not a prophet. You were given 5 years. But bring the Republican Constitution. Give public life. Give this nation constitutional substance. This government must not be allowed to hide behind the ultimate prime ministerial power that is afflicting public life in this country. I make bold to say that no one is sure as to where power and authority lies. Because this country now sits in no man's land. And hardly a person speaks of power unless in the same sentence they call the title Prime Minister, as if that nomenclature of Prime Minister equates with power, ultimate power. And that is the sad state of affairs in the political and constitutional life of this country. Am I supposed to remain silent on that, man? No, I will not still my voice. The people of this country have too much to claim. And the people of this country will demand a Republican Constitution. The people of this country will demand that an election is not used to ambush political parties, and more so to ambush the people of this country. Do what must be done and do it properly. And I therefore reject this proposal for any hierarchies within this Parliament. At a practical level, where these national MPs going to sit next to you, man? or on this platform. And the commoners, I don't know, well, not the commoners, call them that. The ones from the constituencies, I don't know if they'll put the honourable member for St. Lucie somewhere, well, he won't be back anyhow, but I don't know where he will sit. Because I assume he will be a constituency MP. He will deal with the bus service and the lights and the state of the roads, while, well, I don't wish to be invidious, but maybe there are others who will be elevated, reminiscent of the House of Lords, and they will be the lords of the manor, and they will probably sit on this platform and look down on the commoners. Maybe. That is not the only reason why I prefer when you occupy that chair, man. But this parliament and the people of this country will hear me say that if there is to be any representational hierarchy in this country under a Republican constitution, there must be 3 tiers of representation. At the apex, a Senate. Under the Senate, the House of Assembly, where every member is equal, as is now. And a 3rd tier, we deliberated for some, even through COVID, maybe 2 years, and came up with a scheme of local government and asked this government. I remember going to the cabinet. I was a very well-behaved backbencher, you know, man. And I visited the cabinet one day upon invitation, and I presented the proposal of that commission on local governance, all 11 of us, including the one who now writes the Bob Marley speeches, including him. And we came up with what we thought was a brilliant proposal for representation at the local level, and we asked this government to make that a 3rd tier of representation at the local level. Ma'am, I'm not going to give you the details, but I will tell you this. One of the important proposals is that it was non-partisan. Because we felt that people who lived on a street next to each other, who sat on a local council, should not find themselves divided by partisanship. And it was such a beautiful document. It was such a beautiful proposal. May I ask this government today, where is it? I think the Prime Minister the Honourable Prime Minister referred to it today, but I want to know where it is. And rather than hand it to the people of this country, this government is handing to the people of this country a parliament that will divide itself along lines of ancient elitism, where the honourable member for St. Lucie, if he survives, unlikely though, will be a mere constituency representative, and his more favoured friends, whose names I'm tempted to call, I am really tempted, they will become national MPs in this place. And this is what the people of Barbados are hearing today, endorsed by the Honourable Prime Minister, that this Parliament must now be divided, and in the short time that the Honourable Member for St. Lucie has left, he will be relegated to the peripheries of this chamber, while his more favoured friends, and if they get me back, they can call him. You want me to call a name? You want me to call a name? You love a hierarchy.
With my permission, sir.
You might be on the periphery.
With my permission, sir, only.
You might get punished for that with this statement here. Don't forget. And so, Your Honor, that is my position on this proposal for national MPs. Not to criticize the commission. There are some distinguished people there, but we reserve the right speaking on behalf of freedom-loving people in this country, people who are committed to democratic principle, we reserve the right to disagree. And we disagree fundamentally on this issue of national MPs sitting in a parliament with something called constituency MPs, a return to elitism. But if this government finds itself embracing a value system in which elitism must be preserved within the context of republicanism, then it reveals that the government's understanding of republicanism is not well-grounded. It is misconceived. Let us come, though, to one of the other proposals, overseas voting. And we do notice that the Commission rejected overseas voting. We have been engaging the diaspora for some time. And I don't know if the government has been similarly engaging the diaspora. I'm not going to take it upon myself, speaking as an individual, to voice my individual view on that of a parliament, a government, a society. But I would want to encourage the government to listen to the voice of those in the diaspora, some of whom still live here, 3 months here, 3 months there, 3 months here, 3 months there. Some of whom may still have properties here. I would encourage and invite the government to listen to those voices. It is a very contentious issue, and it is not an easy issue to deal with. But how do you dismiss nationalist and patriotic commitment without a discussion? I am not stating a position, ma'am. I'm just encouraging the government to embrace that nationalist and patriotic commitment to this country. There are some people who never really, in many ways, settled in the countries that they adopted and that adopted them. And you speak to a man or a woman who has been in his adopted country for 40, 50 years, even with citizenship. And when he says home, he's talking about Barbados. So that let us not be so insensitive as to entirely dismiss that patriotism with the two-letter word no. Let us engage them. And let us see if there is some ground, some accommodation with condition. Because the rational view will be that if you don't live here, maybe the answer would be no. But do they make a valid claim that even if they're not ordinarily resident here, and that's the term that lawyers will use, even if you're not ordinarily resident here, maybe there is a sense in which you are sufficiently resident here through the ownership of property and the payment of taxes, important, and the remittances that are made, and the lives that are well lived here because of their generosity. It is worthy of discussion, and it is a worthy discussion. I am not today taking a position, ma'am. The only position I take today is that the government and any government should take these claims seriously. Permit me to move on to the question of an independent speaker. And I will say briefly, maybe it has nothing to do with my own peculiar experience here over the last year and some months. I must not speak subjectively, I must speak objectively. And beyond my peculiar experience of being alone on this side, and as I always say, though not lonely, I am still of the view, Your Honor, that the office of the Speaker should be judicial and not political. And that the holder of the office in which you sit today, ma'am, should have a term that exceeds the term of a government in Parliament. That if it is 5 years, the Speaker would sit for 7 or 8 years to guarantee, or as some guarantee, of independence and impartiality. It really does ask a bit much of a Speaker who represents a constituency, who sits in a government, who attends parliamentary group meetings of a government, who functions fully as a member of the government, except that he's called upon to make rulings such as you're called upon today, ma'am. It really asks a bit much of that person to make that intellectual leap to impartiality and independence. It is possible. It is possible, ma'am. But an institution wishes to guarantee, not to you, ma'am, in that office, but it is a guarantee that must be given to the public. And it is a guarantee that must be given to a parliament, that he or she who sits in speakership must be, according to its structural arrangements, independent and impartial. Today, that is not an easy thing to achieve. And I speak not only of today, but all of the yesterdays that have gone before us in this Parliament. The office of Speaker has been a difficult office because there has been no legal and structural guarantee as to his independence or impartiality. In a republic, and a modern republic, Your Honor, that must change. The office must become judicial and cease to be political. Enough on that, Your Honor. It may be of some embarrassment to this government that at paragraph 21, the Commission recommends that there should be no more than 12 ministers and no more than 12 ministries. I did not expect the Honourable Prime Minister to disclose that today, here, in this public place, to the people of Barbados, in a country that has had a cabinet of twice that number. And I will turn and look at the Honourable Member for St. Lucie when I say that. Here we have a recommendation from a Parliamentary Reform Commission which recommends 12 ministries and 12 ministers, and this government is parading across this country with twice that number. Need I say more to the people of Barbados? That this commission is confronting this government with a proposal that collides frontally with the practice of this government. Even the commission, ma'am, even the commission established by this government, headed by a former president of the Senate and a long-standing member of the party in government, the distinguished one himself. And I see nothing in the report that says that his was a dissenting voice. And he now must take collective responsibility for a commission that is confronting this government, that impliedly accuses this government of waste of public resources in funding a cabinet that is twice as large with a few extras as what the commission recommends. It's the largest cabinet in the history of this country. And it is a cabinet headed by an honorable prime minister who complained when there were 17 in the previous cabinet. And at the time, maybe that was the biggest cabinet ever. But if the honorable member for St. Michael Northeast likes to compete, the honorable prime minister has shown in this propensity for competition that she can outdo 17 and that she can go to 24 or 26 or whatever the number used to be. And the ladies and gentlemen, distinguished as they are, all honorable men and women, maybe meet some embarrassment in trampling upon each other's political and administrative terrain. Because there was a time, admittedly, when I was not sure, when I was fighting for those noble fisher folk, I was not sure whether it was under the ministry of the honorable member for Christchurch West Central or the honorable member for St. Philip South. I was not sure who was responsible for the fish markets. I really was not sure. And I hope that those ministers were sure. I don't know if it is possible for a man to leave home and end up in the wrong office, but this government has had so many ministers that if I were to hear that that has happened, it would not surprise me. But the point is made. Paragraph 23, and I'm not bashful about this, crossing the floor. And I will not call names, but there was a dissenting view, not supported wisely by the commission, that if the honorable member for St. Michael Northwest wishes to cross the floor tomorrow, he can. He can. Because the Constitution protects him. However he feels about the front bench, the Constitution allows him freedom of association, and thankfully, the chairman of the commission was a lawyer. Well, is a lawyer. He's still very much with us, and I trust in good health. So that the honorable member for St. Michael Northwest, in his state of trouble, some of it relieved. Political troubles may still be on the horizon, but if he wishes to cross the floor, and this is not a public invitation, nor private,
You're begging.
but if he does it, he sits down there by the honorable member for St. James North. He can go down there with you. So that is resolved by a constitutional right to freedom of association, man. So the dissenting voice, whose name I shall not call, I understand why there would have been dissent from that individual. That individual is what you call a real loyalist. The tribalism of politics really resides within her political bosom more than most. And any departure from the tribe is a departure that must be punished with political death. And that is her philosophical approach to politics. If you are not with me, you must die politically. Not in a republic, though, and not in a republic with a constitution which guarantees the right to freedom of association. And the emphasis there is on freedom. I feel so free. I really do. And that is a story I will tell at another time. I will pass briefly at the composition of the Senate at paragraph 27 of the report. Paragraph 27 of the report, which deals, yes, with composition of the Senate. And it says that the Commission is of the view that it is important to increase the opposition voice in the Senate, as well as to ensure that certain groups are represented in the Senate. And quite nobly, some of those categories articulated are representation of the elderly, the youth, LGBTQ, small business, trade unions, or trade union movement. In this morning's speech, I did not hear any deliberations on that. But the people of Barbados are entitled to know that there was a proposal that the Senate should be constituted among persons representing interest groups, being the elderly, the youth, LGBTQ, small business, trade unions, or the trade union movement. Paragraph 34 is one that you would appreciate that it troubles me, Your Honor. This is the Public Accounts Committee, and I'm wrapping up very soon. I am only dealing with those ones that I consider salient. There are others. The Public Accounts Committee. And this has not been a good story for this country. In 2003, this Public Accounts Committee was established by an Act of Parliament, which put in majority members of the government, the parliamentary government, and not only the parliamentary government, ma'am, but members of the cabinet. And as you know, ma'am, and as the people of Barbados know by now, that the Public Accounts Committee investigates government spending, and not only government spending, but irregularity related to government spending. And how do you investigate irregularity in relation to government spending and have among the investigators members of a cabinet who would have sat in collective responsibility for the same spending? How do you ask them to be investigators as well? Do they investigate themselves? Do they say, I am guilty? Ma'am, it does not make sense. But what I experienced as chairman of the Public Accounts Committee got even worse. That when I tried to investigate Hope, when I tried to make the Hope Housing Project a matter for public investigation by the Public Accounts Committee, a group of ministers of this cabinet came to that Public Accounts Committee and voted that it should not be investigated as a matter of priority. And I insisted, and they insisted too. And they said, look, you may be the chairman, but every one of us in here has a vote. I'm not going to say they cajole me, but they used what they interpreted to be their power. To be their power, and they say that any matter that came before the Public Accounts Committee was subject to a vote. Even a matter of particular investigation, that they could decide what I say, not by the despotic exercise of power, but in a matter in which the public had a vested interest, because it was $60 million of taxpayers' money that went somewhere, and it did not go overseas. And those goodly ministers and others took a vote and said, you shall not investigate that. People of Barbados, that is what happened. Must I be afraid? Must I be afraid to say that? Must I be afraid to reflect and relate my experience as chairman of a Public Accounts Committee that was frustrated in its effort to investigate suspected irregularity in relation to public funds in the amount of $60 million for a housing project that is still hobbling today? and there can be no firm proof as to where the $60 million has gone. And in some cases, although it has gone, the government is still in the business of trying to repair the side houses. Where's the money coming from? That is not for an answer. That is rhetorical. The point I make now is that under this government, the Public Accounts Committee has been paralyzed. It has been paralyzed, Your Honor, and having been so paralyzed by this government's intervention at the Public Accounts Committee, who will be the guardian of public monies? I remember everyone that was in that room that fateful afternoon when the work of the Public Accounts Committee was assassinated, when we were brought to a halt, and no one will now sit on that committee and allow its work to be conducted. And I send this notice to this government and to the people of Barbados that I'm coming back with it. And if I get resistance a second time, the people of Barbados will know, because the hearings of the PAC are not to be kept private. It is a matter of public business because it is a matter of public funds. And it must not be kept private. And the work of the Public Accounts Committee, which is the only body that supervises government spending on behalf of the people of Barbados, must be allowed to continue. I am coming back. But today, Your Honor, we are dealing with the Parliamentary Reform Commission report, which I still say is futile, because this report will not advance Parliament in this country unless it is discoursed upon within the context of constitutional reform. Is this exercise today futile? Are we merely taking up parliamentary time? And so, Your Honor, that is where we are today. I close, Your Honor, by asking this government to suspend this activity today and to replace today's business with the report of the Constitutional Review Commission. I think that's the name. If this government wishes to be taken seriously as a government interested in constitutional reform, parliamentary reform is only properly dealt with within the context of larger constitutional reform. And I ask this government to suspend this business and to come to this country with urgency with a Republican Constitution. A Republican Constitution in which power derives and devolves from the people upwards, as opposed to a Westminster Constitution in which power derives and devolves from upwards downwards, except that in Barbados today, ultimate power is being exercised in this constitutional vacuum by an omnipotent and all-powerful Prime Minister. That is the state of political life in Barbados. That is the state of constitutional life in Barbados. And it is thriving in a state where there is a constitutional vacuum, where we are describing ourselves as a republic only because we have localized the office of the head of state. Yes, we are a republic because the head of state is local. But beyond that, none of the traditions of Westminster now visit this country constitutionally and politically. Ultimate power resides in the Prime Minister. And that is why I say a Republican Constitution is urgent, not for the sake of window dressing, but for the sake of freedom, justice, and democracy in this country. so that institutions must know that they have powers that are independent. Institutions of state must know that they have powers that are independent and that they can function impartially, except that every ministerial discourse in this country now admits that nothing is done unless it is done with the condonation of that office called Prime Minister. And it is said quite blandly, but it is true. The public says it, the public knows it, the public hears it, the public experiences it every day. Every news report. I am not here to condemn, but maybe if a minister speaks as to the work in his ministry, and he or she learns to speak independently, in defense of the dignity and the integrity and the independence of the office, except for collective responsibility, unless he or she learns to speak the language of ministerial responsibility, then he or she admits to prime ministerial autocracy. The former member for St. Peter used a different word. He used the word despotism. And there are many people in Barbados who now consider his words the words of prophecy. And it need not be prophecy, except that the Prime Minister must be told that the ultimate power in this country is the Constitution and not the Prime Minister. And the people of Barbados are weighted under by the ultimate exercise of prime ministerial power, because we have suspended the Republican Constitution. And we remain with Westminster, except that we have dismissed the British Crown, replaced it with a titular local head of state, and I use the word titular. But that real political power now resides in the hands of one person. And that display of power within Westminster tradition allows one person in this country to determine when elections will be called. That is not a feature of republicanism. A feature of republicanism would be that a term of government is fixed. Whether 4 years or 5, it is fixed. So that an election date is not a matter of ambush. An election date is properly fixed within a Republican constitution where representative government properly exists, where power is genuinely exercised on behalf of the people and not by the whim, not by the arbitrary action of one person who will determine that all activities of the state, from the police back to any other institution, will be at the whim and fancy of one person who happens to be called the Prime Minister. That is the state of Barbados. That is the constitutional state of Barbados. And where lies this document today? This document, for all intents and purposes, ma'am, is useless. And I mean no disrespect to those who sat on the commission, because they ought to have been the Constitutional Reform Commission. When one looks at the qualification and the content of the commission, the Parliamentary Reform Commission, they ought to have been the Constitutional Reform Commission. But this comes today while the other report remains hidden from public view. I don't know when they'll bring it, but this country needs a proper intervention by a government into the public domains of this country to ask this country how it feels about a new constitution and how it feels about what should be the content of that new Republican constitution. But, as I said, government's chief law officer told this country a few months ago it is not a priority. And I repeat, the reason it is not a priority is because maybe this government is comfortable with dictatorship. Maybe, just maybe. And don't be alarmed that I said that, ma'am. That is a view that is honestly held. That this government seems quite content with dictatorship. And the people of Barbados must be relieved from dictatorship. And the words of the former Honourable Prime Minister and Representative for St. Peter must now be put to rest. And if his words are not to be put to rest, if this government continues on its trajectory, his words will not be put to rest. That's what I meant to say. That if this government continues on its present trajectory, the words of the former Honourable Member for St. Peter remain words of prophetic truth, that this country remains subject to despotism. You've been very patient, ma'am. I'm obliged to you.